Hey everyone, welcome to this latest edition of Spoiled, the video series where we talk at length about stuff that you should probably have already seen. We are talking about Mortal Kombat 11 story mode. So again, make sure you watch this after you've beaten Mortal Kombat 11 story mode, because we'll be talking about the beginning, middle, and impressions, things like that. With me today are Andrew Reiner, who's beaten that story mode.
Yes,
So
hello.
he won't be spoiled. We have Matt Miller, who's also played that story mode.
Here I am.
Yeah. Let me start with a little bit about your guys' backgrounds with Mortal Kombat. Reiner, you've played the series for a while now, right?
Yeah, I've played all the way from arcades up. I've played every entry religiously, even the bad ones. So
Yeah.
I love the series.
Yeah, I've played I've played pretty much everything except for Mortal Kombat Special Forces or stuff like that. The current timeline, I think, has been pretty strong about their story modes. They started with MK versus DC, but since then they've gotten really, really good at having these really compelling story modes that people who might not otherwise play fighting games are into, like Matt Miller, who's pretty much here for that reason, I think. At
That's
this
right.
point.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of got into what NetherRealm's been doing with their Injustice stuff.
Mhm.
Because I enjoy fighting games, but on a very casual level. I like playing them for kind of seeing the fiction and the story unfold and that kind of stuff. And usually that means it's not very good in a lot of fighting games. But NetherRealm's been exploring this idea of doing more engaging story content with Injustice. So I kind of thought I'd give MK11 a try. And
Having not played Mortal Kombat X or
almost
Mortal Kombat
any,
9.
I mean, I've played some Mortal Kombat games in the way that anybody who plays video games has played Mortal Kombat because they've been around. And
Right.
so, I think I've played through some story content and done some of those towers before in previous entries and hopped in and out, but nothing for any extended period of time. But with MK11, I played the story through the story mode in a matter of a couple days and was really had a great time.
Yeah, I was surprised with how much I enjoyed it. Reiner, what did you think?
I loved it. It's silly and weird and so over the top that it all kind of sings together, right? Like there's a nice harmony between all that stuff. And it's beautiful, right? Like the work that NetherRealm and the other dev studios put into this, in the facial animations, the set pieces, just the scale of the encounters is really impressive. And I think the writing is pretty good too. Even bringing characters back from the past, they have fun with that. Like these characters, like Johnny Cage has always been ridiculous, but the present version of him, the older version, seems like an ordinary person now. But then you go back to the past in the 90s where he was this actor rock star, and he's so different. They have fun with that, right?
Yeah.
They make fun of themselves as a studio as they kind of bring these characters back.
Current Johnny's still a bit of a jerk, but he's kind of aware of where he goes too far, does things, kind of scales back a little bit, but he still does flips mid round.
Yeah, he's hitting people in the nuts.
Yeah.
Let's not.
I think it's a really good coming together of what they've been doing for the past few years, where Mortal Kombat 9 was this huge, hey, let's just recap the stories of 1 through 3. Let's give everyone fan service. Here's all of your nostalgia. Here's Sector. Here's Noob. Here's all these characters that you're familiar with in the style that you imagine them. And then Mortal Kombat X was, let's move the series forward. Let's introduce a lot of new characters. Let's try to find new ways to play with these characters and tell a new story. And this feels like a middle ground where, hey, here's all your favorite characters as you remember them, but there's also this sort of a forward progress in terms of what we're trying to do with this larger universe. And I think it worked out pretty well for them.
Yeah, but for a series, like a story that's based on killing each other,
Mm-hmm.
they're really bad at it because everybody's still alive in some capacity.
Miller, we were talking about this earlier, but there's, as the more they take that storyline seriously, the more it is weird that mid-round there's just like, here's a fatal blow that's gonna gouge your eyes out, and then you're back.
Well,
and it's, oh man, okay, what a friendly spar we just had
between daughter and father.
Right, that's literally the first fight is literally Cassie Cage versus Sonya Blade, and it's one of those things where she walks up and in order to be promoted, you have to defeat me, and they're kind of like, all right, we're gonna have this friendly bout, and it's just like this whoop ass,
and then they shoot each other with machine guns.
Right, exactly. Cassie's fatal blow has her like shoot her Glock 3 times into Sonya's chest, and they're like, all right, happy birthday, basically, you did it. And then like from there, it just moves, like anytime there's like a friendly spars, when those moments are kind of weird.
I would argue that they start to feel weird tonally across the whole game, even when you have enemies that are more in opposition to one another. There's a incongruity between the tone of storytelling, which is very sort of pulpy and almost comic book like, with borrowing a lot from familiar kind of sci-fi tropes of time travel and that kind of stuff, and everything feels very over the top. And then you get into the fight, and the gruesome nature of some of the attacks feels just like away from that tone. And mind you, I get that like Mortal Kombat's kind of always been about that kind of stuff, but it does feel weird to me, right? As a relative newcomer to the franchise, other than knowing that about it, it just feels like we're kind of going through this fun little sci-fi story, and then all of a sudden somebody's getting their eyes shot out.
Yeah, it feels like the sort of the stuff that you see in the fights, that sort of brutal, like over the top killing, basically, that feels like the base tone of Mortal Kombat of like, this is what we're selling, and then here's this lighter, sort of more fun tone that they're setting with the story mode. And it's not like they're going to go back through those fights and say like, we're going to do the toned down version of these supers, basically, or these attacks in the story mode. But it's kind of this weird thing. But I still enjoyed it despite that. I think it's not a thing that took me out of the experience. It's just a thing where it's like, yeah, maybe that shouldn't have, like, it's a little weird that she shot her 3 times in the chest. And now they're totally fine.
I mean, I am. I know a lot of the people who are going to be watching this are people who have already played this game, but I hope that some of those people will actually reach out to friends who are like me, who really don't care about Mortal Kombat, and maybe try to convince them that this is like lend them the game if you have it on physical media, or convince them to find a way to play through this story mode, because independent of any of the other stuff that this game has to offer, it's a lot of fun. And it's a lot of fun coming at it the way that I did, without the background of knowing these characters well, or knowing the weird story beats that have happened in previous entries. In some ways, it almost accentuates the insanity, right? Like, it's almost more fun, I think, when I'm coming across these scenes where I'm like, okay, who is this guy? Who is that guy? Right? Like why? How do they know each other? And then all of a sudden they're in these huge fights, and they're talking about these crazy events of like, you killed me in the past, and now I'm going to murder you in the future, and all this kind of insane stuff starts to roll out through the course of the story. And I caught myself a lot of times just sort of smiling inwardly about how bonkers everything was that was unfolding on screen.
That's interesting, because I think my initial takeaway of it was that this story needs a primer, because it starts off, it does feel more so than even Mortal Kombat X as like, here's this sort of third act where the game starts with Shinnok has been defeated by Raiden, and he's being tortured basically, and you see this scene that is, even if you the end of Mortal Kombat X takes place after that first scene.
Right.
Yeah.
So he tortures Shinnok, and then he takes his head and says, I'm going to take your head as an offering to NetherRealm to tell them, like, I'm not screwing around anymore. I'm coming for you guys. I'm tired of always playing defense.
Yeah.
And then the ending from Mortal Kombat X happens, and then the next scene where the special forces basically start invading the NetherRealm happens.
Yeah.
And if you don't know who those characters are, you're like, why is this guy so important?
Or even the realms, right? Like, they don't really give you a lot of setup for that kind of stuff.
Right. Like, what is Outworld? What is what are the NetherRealms? What's Earthrealm? Like, were you like, how did you have a firmly established sense of place of, do you understand like when they're in Outworld, when you see a lot of Kotal Kahn and Jade, basically, that's Outworld versus Earthrealm.
I think they contextualize that stuff pretty well. I mean, part of what I like about this is about approaching it as I did is the same thing I like about reading some really great sci-fi novel for the first time, right? A lot of good science fiction is based on the experience of going in and not knowing what's going on, and kind of slowly putting the pieces together. People who are newcomers to science fiction sometimes struggle with that, where they'll like start to read the first 100 pages of a novel, and they'll be like, I don't even understand what this term is. What are they even talking about? They never told me what this is. And it takes a while as you get into reading speculative fiction or gaming in speculative fiction or watching movies to like get to that point where you're like, oh, that's actually the fun, is figuring all that stuff out. And so with Mortal Kombat 11, I think there's a quality of that where, yeah, I didn't know who Kotal Khan was, but slowly but surely I kind of put all the pieces together. Like, okay, so he's like the leader of this other realm. And I guess he's got a relationship with this woman, and his adversary is this guy who was dead, and like all that kind of stuff starts to fit into place pretty quickly.
Yeah. So as someone who does know that stuff that's more or less right. Like
Right.
Kotal Khan was a guy who was basically being tortured while Shao Kahn was the emperor, and then when he died, he kind of he was released and eventually made his way up to the top.
Right.
And Jade was sort of like his lover in a lot of ways, and then it was weird that Shao Kahn came back, and that was that was a cool thing to see, because I realized that those two had not interacted on screen before, which is this really cool moment of, here are the two Khans, here are the two most powerful people in Outworld, and they're gonna fight each other. And that's just kind of stuff that as a fan I'm excited to see.
The fan service is great. Like Kung Lao and Liu Kang together. Like you immediately start thinking about Shaolin monks at times. Like you're like, yes, do another one of those games. But just whenever popular characters return in different ways. Poor Goro, by the way.
Yeah.
Like, what's up? Like, everybody comes back. Like,
Shiva comes back and Goro doesn't.
No, he's dead. Yeah. No, he's dead. But it's like every character in this universe has come back in some capacity, even as zombie versions.
Yeah. Shang Tsung is like DLC.
he's dead.
Yeah. And then
poor Goro.
So why? Tell me. I mean, without that context, why is he like not back? Do you have a sense? Like why they didn't bring him back?
I think they just.
There's a bunch of characters that aren't back, but he's the one they mentioned the most, and it's like I was waiting for it.
He's one of the few characters that I know about that I was like kind of waiting for. I guess I thought I was going to get somewhere near the end of the game, and the big forearm dude was going to come out.
Nah, he's dead.
Yeah,
okay.
It's weird that they. I guess it's fine that they use Shiva, because I don't think Goro would have been able to play that role the same way, where she was kind of a negotiator for her people, whereas I don't think Goro would have done that. I think he's completely a bad guy. Also, Shang Tsung's not involved, and I don't remember their relationship, but
Shang Tsung's mentioned a lot.
It struck me that how much they're considerate about that stuff, because when we went to visit them for the cover story, we were talking with their story director, Dominic Cianciolo. I think, I apologize for butchering that, but he told me basically that when they factor in the roster, they do factor in what are the characters that we need to have for the story mode. So I think that was one of the major considerations for a lot of the people who made it in. And I guess Goro was just, I guess they found it important enough to stick with their story, to not say like, let's just have this fan favorite character. I mean, and at some point, if they want, they can have him down the line as DLC, and then he won't impact the story at all. But I like that there's stuff, callbacks like, hey, here's this like Kung Lao, Liu Kang, and the past selves versus Scorpion. And that's like totally like an MK2 thing. And then there's also a lot of history colliding with, hey, here's Johnny Cage confronting his past self. Like in a lot of ways. They do that
with every character, by the way.
Yeah, but
there is no surprise. Like, oh, who's the silhouette? Oh, I know.
Yeah,
it's me.
But I think I like that different characters take to different, like Scorpion, like they're adversaries for pretty much everything. And then it was, I think Johnny Cage was the one that was most striking to me, because a lot of it, you think like, okay, he's this little punk ass. He's not going to like, he's like super cocky. And then there's the one moment where they're talking about Sonya, and then he's like, oh yeah, I totally tapped that. And that was like just like a record scratch moment of like everyone just
turned
stops.
their head. Yeah,
like Johnny
great.
Cage immediately turns around and grabs him by the ear and takes us like, you can't talk to people like that. That is not that is not cool.
We don't do that anymore.
Yeah, that's like, I think at some point you just tell them to go back to the 90s.
But what's really funny is, so they have it set up where if the past version of a character gets hurt, that damage carries over to the future version. So you see at one point Johnny Cage takes a bullet to the cheek, like grazes his cheek, and then the future version has a scar there.
Right.
They should have done that in the fights themselves when you're fighting the guys. So
every time you punch someone, you both take damage.
When you break his ribs, like, oh, my ribs don't hurt.
It's funny because like as serious as I like, there's a lot of stuff I like about this, but like in terms of a time travel plot story, it doesn't even feel like they're trying to keep it consistent, because it's all story things where it's like, oh yeah, we're both hurt, and then we both like, Kano ends up dying twice basically because I think it's Cassie that kills one of them. But when it comes to like even fights, or even just like in certain cutscenes, it just like Scorpion ends up dying, towards the end, but the other Scorpion doesn't die.
Yeah.
No. So it's like, I guess it's maybe only if the past version dies. Now that I'm just not realizing.
Yeah, the past version dies, you disappear.
Right. And then,
So they talk about that with Cassie.
and then
like,
also it's like one of those things where it's like, yeah, if young Sonya dies, that's like, or young Johnny dies, that's like a threefer because
Right.
Cassie would also die.
It feels like they are pretty loosey-goosey with their rules for time travel.
For
like
sure.
where it's convenient for our storytelling, we're gonna handle it one
Yeah,
way.
especially like that's especially prominent with Chronica.
Yeah.
Because it feels like she comes in as this ringer who's like, I'm gonna fix the stuff that Raiden's broken. He's completely, just destroyed this timeline. It's a mess. I'm gonna fix it by basically taking people who don't like the current state of the universe and try to fix it. But there's this weird mix of I'm going to hand wave this problem away where I have magic time power, so I'm just going to remove Liu Kang from the equation for now, but I'm not going to kill him because it's like, I don't have that kind of power. But there are just times where she's just able to summon people from other timelines, which quick thing, it's weird when she does that first summon where here's Aaron Black, here's Jade, here's all these other people, and they all seem totally prepared to have been summoned.
Yeah.
Where they come out of these tornadoes and they're like, all right, Aaron Black's
Let's
like,
go.
let's go. Instead of like, what is going on?
Yeah, everybody's completely unfazed by this. They move into the action as if it's just like, I mean, to be fair, these guys do live in a pretty screwed up world.
Sure.
So
But I
maybe
feel
this
like
is
they would
just
be
par for the course.
Maybe it would be slightly disorienting to be like, instead of just, hey, it's me, it's Jade, like just being like, what is, like any sort of like them being confused would have been good versus what they did with but that's like a minor thing. But yeah,
I like the time tornadoes. The
it's a cool,
hourglass dust.
it's a cool moment, but it like a lot of the stuff in this game, it doesn't if you scrutinize it too much, it doesn't make a lick of sense.
Yeah, don't think about it. I think that's what I love about it is it is just so over the top and crazy. But at the same time, it's engaging, right? Like you're hooked on the narrative. You want to see how they take down Chronica and what happens to these characters at the end. Even though they could just retcon it in the next Mortal Kombat 12, there's cool things that happen. And from the moment that story started to the end, I was like hooked on it. I loved it.
One of the things that I was struck by, I mean, again, I came to this game and was excited about playing the story mode because of having seen what they did with Injustice 1 and 2, and I enjoyed those games. I thought that this story mode, from the music work to the voice work to the cinematography of their scenes, like everything is really good. I mean, yes, it's over the top, silly sci-fi trope storytelling, but within that tone, it does an awesome job. I mean, I've repeatedly kept thinking to myself, like, man, I really want NetherRealm to like be able to spread their wings a little bit. It's seen this kind of content being produced from them, to be able to see them do some other genres of games at this point. I would love to see like an action RPG from those guys, whether it was in the Mortal Kombat universe or something totally new, where they could have this tier of storytelling talent on display, but not have everything bound by the need to get it back to a 1v1 beat up scene.
Yeah, even as a fighting game guy, I could see them totally. I would like something like a Shaolin Monks 2, let's say.
Sure.
Right? That would be a cool way for them to rope in their cinematic chops at this point and tie it into something that they could work to fuse those things together in a good way, instead of having to be hamstrung by the idea of like every couple minutes we need to have a fight.
Yeah.
And one thing that I think stood out to me about Mortal Kombat 11 specifically in terms of the visuals and the cinematography is we were talking to the art director, whose name escapes me. He mentioned how he wanted to have a more refined, a color palette that popped a little more, because he was inspired by the variety of locations in Mortal Kombat 3. That really shown here, where you have a number of like these beautiful backdrops, like even in the NetherRealm, where they're near Charon's ship, this like blazing sun in the background, and it just has this red illuminating light. Places like the Shirai Ryu Temple, that is just this gorgeous sort of autumn scene with these red petals falling everywhere. The Desert Command Strike Force base, all those places feel like they're distinct because of not only their locales, but how the visuals in those scenes pop out in these very stark contrasts compared to something like Mortal Kombat X or even 9, where a lot of those scenes are like either nostalgic or like, let's get very dark, let's try to make something realistic, and so it's always raining, it's always dark, there's always lightning in the sky, and that made sort of the globe-trotting nature of this story mode pop out even more. Like these locations are way different than they happened in the past.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think that's all under, like, I know it's all in service of this really campy fun stuff, but I think I did appreciate a lot of some of the smaller moments between characters. I think I ended up being a big fan of Kotal Khan and Jade's relationship and how that ended up factoring into the story.
There's a surprising amount of heart in this game.
Yeah.
Not just in the hands of a character that he just ripped out of someone's chest, but
there's some of that too. But
I mean, again, don't take it like, oh man, you're going to be tearing up or anything, but there are actual exchanges between characters that are meaningful and good for character development and showing that NetherRealm can not just be punching people, but they can, take it serious on a personal level. And I like that. And it never stops, right? Like it's just a brief moment and then it's right back into the carnage.
Stuff like, Raiden, being bewildered by the fact that he would go evil and then very slowly realizing like, wait, this is the exact path that I am taking right now. I need to stop that immediately.
I mean, they give him every like, you're going to have this thing on your chest. Your eyes are going to go crazy.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, that won't happen to me. And it's
then
like,
immediately happens.
It's like, and there's that thing I'll put on my chest.
I will say that, again, it draws on some very familiar tropes that we've seen show up in other properties, but the scene between Raiden and Liu Kang, where you see the flashback where he like realizes that this is like, whoa, this doesn't just happen like
once or twice,
that like I'm in a cycle and this has happened again and again.
It was cool.
Even without the context of like having seen some of those scenes play out in previous games, that was really fun. And it's cool to see this sort of moment of transformation where the characters kind of break out of the cycle a little bit.
Yeah.
Let's speak about transformations, by the way.
Yeah.
So Liu Kang becoming a god.
Fire god Liu Kang.
Yeah. Like that was unexpected. Raiden is kind of inside of him, like Firestorm from DC Universe a little bit.
Yeah, he gives him his. He shows up at the end, right? But he doesn't have his godly eyes, so it's just Raiden's power infused into Liu Kang, and then which is this weird sort of opposite moment because the way he died in Mortal Kombat 9 was because of like his fire mixing with Raiden's lightning and that sort of sparking some reaction that ended up killing him. And this feels like the loop. I don't know if it's intentional, but a loop background of their powers combined now into creating this like ultimate being, basically.
Now that moment where he transforms, he comes to and he's like, "Whoa, I'm in like a different outfit and everything." Did Raiden dress him? Is that a deleted scene where he's lying unconscious? He's like, "Here's your new outfit.
Gonna give him some tattoos on both arms. You're gonna have two dragons.
This is gonna be really cool.
Oh, you mean these dragons?" It was like an interesting, like that was the moment where it started escalating from like, "Hey, here's this campy thing from the '90s" into like just almost straight up anime or like superhero
super anime.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like a very Dragon Ball moment.
Like
right?
I'm surprised he didn't just end up like flying right into Chronica's lair and like teleporting her around the world.
He kind of does
a little
right?
bit, yeah.
I mean, there's some element to the end of that game where the scale of things that are happening in the final 10 minutes are so insane that you almost don't even like unless you take a step back, you're like don't realize how totally bonkers it all is. I mean, basically correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like what's kind of going on there is that the entire like Kronika effectively gets what she wants. It's just that in the final analysis, she hoped to be the one directing how time would go. And instead, she resets time, but she doesn't get to decide how it's going to go. And so from here on out, for future Mortal Kombats, they get to like do whatever they want because now there's this Liu Kang god who's going to set the terms of engagement, kind of.
It's weird because I ended up doing clearing the tower with Liu Kang, and it was a similar ending, but it's I guess the implication in his tower ending is that he does that and then says, "Oh yeah, I ended up giving it to basically spreading out command over these multiple people, but then eventually I kind of got tired of it, and so I became just like a person in the universe. Like I ended up not sort of relinquishing my godlyhood a little bit and just becoming a normal person."
Those endings, those are
not
Elseworlds. Canon. Yeah, sometimes they take them as canon, sometimes they don't. Like if they really like one narrative beat there, but it's always like who ends up kind of coming out on top. Right. Each character has like a moment where they're on top,
and often they're mutually exclusive, right? Because it's all based on who got to be Kronika, who is controlling the world in this case. But it's an interesting twist that now they can basically take it wherever they want. and I'm curious to see what they end up doing. But there's a lot of interesting beats. Like I like sort of that whole timeline wrapping around itself of like, hey, we have this time travel thing that we started with where Raiden sort of went back into or had the visions and then ended up being the guy who eventually fixes everything. I like that loop towards the end of, that we can't just keep running this loop. We have to correct something. I remember there's a line that Kronika tells him, like, you don't think you've tried that, you fail at this several times.
Right.
Like
we've done this before.
Yeah. And there's a lot of stuff like that. I like, they hinted at this a little bit in Mortal Kombat X with Scorpion and Sub-Zero coming together and sort of putting aside their beef. But I like seeing them cooperate more thoroughly in this one as, hey, here's just this whole chapter where like ultimate fan service. Here's Sub-Zero and Scorpion teaming up against, Frost, who's like this wayward disciple of Sub-Zero.
I was a little disappointed in their new character designs.
Yeah?
I'm a big fan of them having the masks, like the full gear.
Mm-hmm.
So for them in the story to be mostly like showing their faces, I know they did that
The facial
for
capture,
the facial capture, but part of their allure is like Boba Fett, right? Like they just look awesome when they're
these
fully
faceless
garbed.
avatars that you can sort of embody. I like Scorpion's design overall.
I mean, they're cool characters, but not as cool as that.
Sure. Like, I mean, you do get some of that stuff in, the rest of the game. Basically, you can have them wear a mask if you want. But I like that they're showing a different side, right? Like to emphasize that this person who is a demon, effectively, who has been a demon for most of the storyline, he was a real person at one point, right? And fleshing out their histories. I think for whatever reason, it kind of bothered me that Steve Blum did the voice for Sub-Zero, because at that point he sounded a little bit more generic. Because you've heard that voice so many times that it's just like all I can imagine when I hear Steve Blum at this point is just Steve Blum. Versus I liked Scorpion's voice actor. I think he did a pretty good job. I think most of the voice acting is done pretty well.
Yeah. Sonya's.
I think Ronda Rousey is like the weakest point by far. I don't think she did like a good job. I feel like she
and also
feels like she's
had
half
some of the
asleep.
most dramatic moments too.
Yeah,
right?
she had like a pretty clutch moment early on where she had to deliver the like, "Hey, I'm about to die. Get out of here."
It didn't
I'm
work.
about to be and
I laughed through that whole sequence
just
because it
feels
was framed so ridiculous of her just like under rocks.
like I can't imagine they had too much time with her. Her being such a celebrity and all, but it does definitely feel like they had one take for most of these lines, and then like her first reading of like, "Okay, Sonya, you have to get out of here." That's all the time I got.
All right, thanks everybody.
Yeah.
See you next time.
Yeah, she's definitely a weak point in that story mode, but I think most of the people do a pretty good job. I really missed Ashley Birch as Cassie Cage initially, but I think that the new voice actor, whose name again escapes me, I grew into her. I think I like her now a lot. And I think most of those characters do a good job with the lines they have, and I think they do a good job of having these characters who are somewhat self-aware of like, hey, this is all kind of ridiculous. Let's sort of take a little moment and say like, what is going on? And there's characters like Raiden or Kotal Khan who take this stuff super seriously and speak in these very like stiff, like not like intentionally like, hey, I am speaking in a very lore-like voice.
It feels appropriate.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Like even though it is stilted, it feels like those characters are meant to be that way. And
yeah, right. Like it's the difference between like Raiden saying something like "this cannot be" versus Johnny Cage saying something like that. Like that's not like they do a good job of having those different characters feel different. And there's a surprising amount of like in that Tarkatan camp when Kotal makes the choice of no, I super don't like you guys, and I'm going to beat all of you to death. Where he makes that slight turn, and Jade is trying to like appease him, and they end up fighting, obviously, because that's what you do in this mode. But that I thought that was a pretty good moment, and then eventually them reconciling. I think Jax's arc, like future Jax's arc, is actually good. Super compelling, because it's this totally farcical thing, but they treat it very seriously. With Jax specifically, he was a revenant for a while, where he was serving under Quan Chi. He's basically a dead person's servant. And he comes back from that. He was rescued in Mortal Kombat X, and he's basically like just taken. Like his recovery has been long. He's basically has PTSD at this point, and it serves him. It gives him a decent reason to side with Kronika, because she does have that key line of people who are not satisfied with the current state of the universe,
right?
Which does not necessarily have to be exclusively bad guys. And I think Jax is the one that I think was like, oh, that's why they have that line in there, so it's not all bad guys.
I mean, even when you have like that character. It feels like he goes over the top, and that maybe he should have realized things were bad sooner than he does. He is the one character in the whole story who feels like he is has has an appropriate reaction to the world in which he lives.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what I mean? Like all these other people feel like they should also have horrible PTSD,
Yeah.
right? Like that they've witnessed terrible things and that they should just be a wreck all the time. And so at least there's one character in the story who represents that, like, yeah, this place is really screwed up.
Yeah, and I think his whole arc with him and Jackie and younger Jax, I think that whole segment I think is really, really well done. With him realizing it's some like Jackie's hanging off the cliff and he's like, "You're about to kill your own daughter for this. Like she's the reason you're here, right?" And you just so that she doesn't have to repeat your mistake, she's gonna die. And then they do like I think young Jax is really good. He's a really good character. One of the few people where it's not the older person teaching the younger lesson,
Right.
a lesson. I think he's one of those things where you can learn from your past and embrace it in a lot of ways. And I thought that was really strong. I'm just gonna go through my notes here real quick.
Yeah, one thing I'd say, Chronica like did not play her cards well.
Yeah,
You know, having godlike power,
Feels like
you
she
know,
could have won,
she could have easily
right?
done
Yeah.
what she wanted to. Cetran's an interesting character too.
Yeah,
A new addition to
she was introduced in like this weird way. Oh, I'm one of the gods. I'm here to help you. And then eventually, like you realize, like, oh, Chronica's, the people these people are serving. And she becomes the sort of the de facto face, betrays the other elder gods, and becomes this force. I thought it was really weird that it's just like they don't. They kind of explained it away very quickly, that crown that they find of like it's imbued with a bunch of souls and some of Chronica's
It made
power.
no sense to me.
If you put it on, you'll be stronger, but it's like the fight. There's no difference in the fight. It's just like you wearing that crown
Right.
and you just are as strong as Chronica is.
It's a really weird MacGuffin, right? Because like it shows up and then kind of departs from the story very rapidly.
Yeah.
And you have a moment where one of the mortal characters uses it, and there's a hint that it's like, oh, this thing has a dark power to it, and it's going to hurt you to use it. But then they never follow through on that. She just takes the crown back off when she's done.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's kind of weird. Can you explain to me what happened to the elder gods? Like I don't know who they are.
Oh, I like how they framed
Like,
them in this
how
one,
did
by
they
the way.
how did they get taken out? What happened there?
I think it happens off screen mostly, right? Like
Yeah.
I think it's implied that Cetrion and or Chronica betray them basically and kill them.
Okay, so they're dead.
Yeah, so I think that's part of
Eh.
part of the aftermath. Yeah, that should have been a more explicit scene in the storyline as
It
a
feels
whole.
like it because Raiden just shows up. I get that they like there's this like meeting place that he goes and he talks to
I
them,
love that moment, by the
which
way.
is cool.
It's super cool looking.
but then he goes back and they're gone, and I'm like, well, what happened to
yeah,
these guys?
don't worry about them. Yeah.
Okay, and
Uh,
Cetrion's one of those.
Cetrion is one of the elder gods, yeah.
Okay,
And so Shinnok was one of the elder gods, and so
Okay.
she's supposed to be his polar opposite, where she is life and then Shinnok is death.
and are the others? Are they just kind of unnamed,
Yeah, they're
unknowable
kinda like-
figures?
Yeah, the
Okay.
idea they're like part of a whole council thing, and
Okay.
that governs all of the realms,
Yeah.
things like that. And I think other thing that stood out to me is a lot of these character designs are very different. One thing that stood out to me was that Shao Kahn feels more dragon-like than ever, in that he's part dragon. He has like sort of these darkened
Yeah.
things around his
The
arms.
eyes.
That, yeah.
Boy, he screamed the whole way through that. Mostly about just don't sit on my throne was
Yeah.
like that was his big beef, I think.
I think he could have
He
calmed down a
likes
little bit
his
because like, oh yeah, I'm back, and it's like, why are you on my throne? It's because you're dead, dude. Like I wasn't like,
What do you want from me?
like
He
that-
explained that as clearly and calmly as he could. He's
Yeah.
like, "Get off my throne!"
No, and he's like, no, I'm on my throne. It's also weird that Garrus feels like a pretty throwaway character. It feels like. I
yeah,
don't
it
know,
was
I don't-
weird. He was a weird guy.
He has this weird line where he says like, I'm a fixed point in time, but with every death I grow stronger. So that feels like a conflicting statement to me, where he's like, "Oh, you can't kill me because I'm always, like if you try to kill
I'm
me,
always the same.
Maybe
except
that's
I'm
like-
not.
yeah,
That's him just saying, "I don't want to fight. Please don't fight me. Please don't fight me."
I'm trying to bluff.
Here's
Oh,
a
got me
lie.
text. Don't fight." I think their arc with Liu Kang, I think was like pretty good in that he went from being this. They basically encapsulated his entire arc throughout the series, where
Yeah.
he was alive and then he eventually was killed, and he works as a revenant, and then he comes back and is the person who saves everyone. Which is funny because when we asked who was the main protagonist of Mortal Kombat or of Mortal Kombat as a series. He says Liu Kang, right? But at the
Mhm.
time, it certainly didn't feel that way. It definitely felt like, as of MKX, it felt like the new characters, the combat kids, were in the prime to be the main characters going forward.
Yeah, it felt like in 9, that's where he was Zombie Kang, right? Like, or became.
In 9, he dies at the end of 9.
Yeah.
And in Mortal Kombat 10, he's a Revenant working for Shinnok or Quan Chi, but then both of them die. So he's basically the next strongest person. Him and Katana are basically the leaders of the Netherrealm.
Right. You following that?
No,
So
that's okay though.
so he starts off as basically in Mortal Kombat 9, he starts off as the first bad guy.
Okay.
And then he becomes the ultimate good guy.
Right.
One of the choices that I felt was odd here is that, okay, we've got a game called Mortal Kombat, and clearly there's a big interest in, like, we've got attacks in our game that are all about, like, I am gonna murder you, right? We also have, as a part of the conclusion of the story, is that everything gets reset, right? Like, time starts over. Okay.
Right.
So what I don't understand.
Well, they have that. They kind of leave it on a cliffhanger, right? Like they're floating in
power,
the
yeah.
universe. They're going to do
I guess-
something, right?
I guess so, but by the end, you're back at the beginning of time, and there's a dude who has the capability to kind of like shape the universe however he wants, right? He can start it over and whatever, and it gives them the freedom to, if they do a subsequent game, that they can do whatever they want. So here's my question: why don't they kill more people in that instance? Like, you have some like moments that land strong, even to somebody like me who doesn't get the
There's
fiction, like what's his face, Scorpion's, the older Scorpion's death, right? That's a moment that lands as a storytelling thing, because, like, oh, I get that he's an important guy and he gets killed. So why not just do it with everybody?
they
Why
kind
do
of
they leave
imply
people
that
alive?
there's a moment between Jade and Jade and Liu Kang, right, where they're kind of talking about that, like people are gonna veer into the darkness, you know,
Yeah.
and he's like, we just got to kind of let it play out.
Okay.
So I don't know what he changed. Yeah, I guess maybe we'll find out in 12.
It's definitely part of that whole, like, they're very picky with when they choose to implement their rules.
Yeah.
Because like I was thinking, like, a lot of this time, like, why doesn't Chronica just kill past Raiden as well? Because he killed future Raiden. Why not just remove Raiden from the equation
Like
altogether?
I said, she played her cards very poorly.
Yeah. There's also just a lot of, like, random things that I noticed. Like, there's a part where I think Cyrax, the yellow one, right, puts his hand on this thing, and it's like supposed to be like a hand reader, but for robot, like cyborg hands.
Sure.
And I spent way too long thinking about how something like that would work, because it's just like,
Cyborg fingerprints, right?
yeah. So
Yeah.
it's like, I don't know. I was very confused by that. There's also the thing where it's like, at some point in every time travel story, someone does like they reference someone in third person, and then they talk about you, like, oh, you and me. They confuse tense with a lot of people,
Yes.
and that's the thing that's like, I don't know that if time travel were ever, I'm always aware of who I am in an existential way. Like, I don't think I would ever say, but you're me. I would never say like that future version was my consciousness.
How do you know, Suriel? How do you know if older Suriel Vasquez walked into the studio right now? You don't think your mind would be blown?
I would acknowledge it. It's not like I would say like, oh, that's a random guy. Like, but I also wouldn't say that's me, like, you're me, or I would say like, I'm you. I would just say like, that's like another save. You know what I mean? Like, that's like load file number 2. That's
Okay.
not me.
Yeah.
But it's a thing that happens in every time travel story. So of course they had to do it.
I love the nod to Terminator, by the way, where they had the guy down kneeling, coming
Yeah.
back from time, just straight up. And supposedly Terminator is going to be a character, right? Like
Yeah.
a DLC character. So that's perfect.
Yeah, so I think overall I'm pretty, like, I like it quite a bit. I think it's a little weird because I think people, if you're interested in picking it up, it's weird because I was ready to say like, you should probably like watch the first 2 games, which is what I think Hansen did, and he ended up liking Mortal Kombat 9 and 10s, which I was not expecting from him, because he kind of went into it.
Yeah,
So
he's
somewhat
also
pessimistic.
just a weirdo.
Yeah, but I would have said, but catch up on the story a little bit. But it seems like you can just jump in, according to Miller.
I think it depends on your taste. I think if you're willing to just throw yourself down the rabbit hole, there's a lot of fun stuff here, and you shouldn't be held back, especially in a game like this, where as our conversation is evidence of, this thing is so crazy that trying to apply a sensible logic to anything is sort of a fool's errand. I think you're better off being like, hey, I hear this thing is pretty cool, and there's some fun character moments, and it's really like beautifully done, and it has some good voice actors. So I'm going to play it because it's like it's cool and it's good.
Like
That's
on its
kind
own
of,
merits outside
on
of
its own merits. It's a fun time, and like and I think that almost anybody who enjoys that kind of stuff of like sci-fi time travel stories is going to get a kick out of this.
Yeah.
You want to know what's crazy? Mortal Kombat 11's story is the exact same story as Avengers Endgame. So you don't
Wow.
even need to go see that
Wow.
now. This,
You're
this
all
is
done.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
tell me, who's Liu Kang?
Captain America.
Wow. That's
Yeah.
Probably
all
accurate.
right. Thor's Raiden, right?
He gets the Infinity Gauntlet.
That's
and
true.
it's
Which is
just-
actually like it has a little bit of people were telling me like you have to watch like here's like 13 movies you have to watch before Infinity War. I made me watch like 3 of them.
Yeah.
And I watched Infinity War, still a great time.
yeah,
Like,
you're like
exactly.
Miller then.
yeah.
Yeah.
You,
So totally just go into things blind more often. Like you don't have to do the reading.
yeah,
So
I
good
don't,
chance.
Yeah.
I think that is a good guidepost for a lot of things. That like there's so many fictions at this point that are on their 15th entry
Yeah.
that getting too caught up in like I need to be a completionist or I'm not going to engage with this new stuff is a bad move. Like see if you like the thing that is best.
You're right.
Like the stuff that it has culminated to rather than just not engage with it at all.
I feel like people use that stuff as maybe
As an excuse.
as an excuse to say like, well, there's just this
Yeah.
such a large barrier
And
to entry, and I could never get through all 7 seasons
so
of Game
don't
of Thrones. Yeah,
right like I think in my case I actually, having played MK11, I'm a little bit more compelled to at some point try to track down or borrow a copy of like 10 from somewhere or X, sorry, and play it just because it's like I kind of liked 11. I might like to see what happened
Yeah.
before then, even though I suspect that 11 might be the most compelling to me just because it's the most up
the
to date.
craziest. Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah. Mortal Kombat 11. I'm impressed with it overall. I like that. I like what they're going with. I'm very curious to see what they end up doing after this because they could literally do anything at this point.
Well, they can go
It seems
all
like
the way
they-
back.
It
do
does seem
whatever
like
they
a
want.
closer, right? It feels like they are closing out this trilogy of games, which ended up being a trilogy. I didn't see this as a trilogy going in, but it definitely seems like that's the case. But
It felt like a
Yeah.
trilogy. Yeah.
yeah, awesome.
Cool.
Thanks for watching, everyone. You can find more stuff on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/Game Informer. You can watch more episodes of Spoiled if you've played through some of the latest games. We have a podcast that we do every week. We have a ton of video features going up on our website and our YouTube channel pretty much all throughout the week. Thanks for watching.